Airsoft gas blowback rifles can be a lot of fun, but to a brand new player, they can be a little confusing. So today I've got Garrett from Gun Gamers here, and we're going to talk about everything that you need to know before buying your first airsoft gas blowback rifle.
Thanks for having me, Lane.
Of course, Garrett. So you have been, as long as I've known you, you've really been like the gas blowback guy in our group.
Ever since kind of the more commercially available options for GBBRs have been accessible to people, something that isn't like a classic that required like external air or something, the stuff you see, what we see today, really kind of started in the early 2010s, and that's when I just kind of jumped feet first into it.
Yeah, and knowing you after all this time, there's so many different platforms that are out there in the world of gas blowbacks. We have two of our own rifles right here. This is my GHK AK-74M, which, just like Garrett's, is completely gas powered. And then what rifle do you have?
So today I brought out just a gun that I kind of pieced together from some extra stuff I had lying around. This is a Mark 18 style of gun. This particular one's kind of an EOD 2004-2005 setup. And this is based on the WE M4 platform.
And WE is definitely one of those ones that a lot of players, when they're looking at their first gas blowbacks, because they are more affordable, is something that a lot of people end up with. So for players who are starting to get into this, one of the kind of misconceptions or beliefs that I see among a lot of players is that if you're getting a gas gun, it's going to require more maintenance, it's going to require more parts. And in your experience, have you really seen that to be the case? Because most AEGs, you buy it, it just works out of the box and you're good to go and hit the field. I
think people personally misunderstand what the maintenance end of it goes. Yes, you have to. The difference with a GBBR versus an AEG is with a GBBR, you can fully disassemble the thing with very minimal tools. Maybe not to every little pin and screw, that of course you'll need tools for, but at least just getting the bolt out, inspecting the trigger pack, or taking a look at mags to check for their function. That stuff you can do without tools. And that's the kind of stuff that people are not used to doing with an AEG, that you do have to do with a GBBR.
Yeah, with the AEG, you just get it, it works for 50,000 rounds. Most people end up breaking it when they try to open it. But with gas blowbacks, you are going to be expected to open it a little bit more for that sort of regular maintenance, like just making sure that things are lubricated. And something that I feel that I have noticed over the years is that with gas guns, you do have less firepower on the field, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I feel like with gas guns, that ratio of like how many rounds you fire before something breaks, I feel like that's a much lower number than on an AEG. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And I think that's largely because A, the mags are lower capacity, so you're not shooting as many rounds before you have to do something. Plus, it's not like an AEG where there's very few part interactions that cause at least certain degrees of wear. Because you have a bolt carrier slamming back and forth, it's a whole different fatigue cycle or even just a stress cycle compared to an AEG.
Yeah, and so I guess, it can vary from brand to brand, but what do you, in your experience, have noticed are those parts that break the most often?
Definitely inside the nozzle or the nozzle itself. There's usually an O-ring at the back, and that's what helps to cycle the gun. That usually needs to be inspected at least once you're done for the day. This particular one actually needs to be replaced. Yeah. The bolt itself can, depending on what it's made of, a lot of GBBRs now are coming out with more and more steel parts, so they generally tend to fare a lot better in the long term. WEs are generally that zinc alloy or pot metal, as some people refer to it. So those components are definitely going to not last as long because they're softer. Or aluminums, if certain parts are aluminum. But then you also have to contend with part interactions as well. If you have a steel part affecting an aluminum or zinc alloy part, then the zinc alloy part is going to break faster. But some people jump right in and do a full replacement of steel stuff. I don't know if that's necessarily required to do in all cases, but it's also nice when a gun comes with that out of the box.
Yeah, if it's going to come like that. But I know so many people, especially with GHKs, because I feel like gas blowbacks really have a tight-knit community of people who share their experience with aftermarket parts and just with the platform as a whole. people love to say, oh, like GHKs, despite being the best gas AK, like you immediately have to replace this part and that part because they are made out of the softer aluminum. But this is completely stock on the inside, and it's still kicking, and I recognize that eventually that part will have to be replaced. But I feel like there's so many people who say to even get out of the gate and have something that you can use, you already have to dump more money into it.
I would disagree with that as well. A lot of people say with WEs, especially because the bolts are pot metal, and in some places they're reinforced and in other places they're not. A lot of people say that you need a steel bolt, you need a steel trigger pack, you need a steel disconnector, you need upgraded springs, you need to do all this stuff. I would disagree with that. I run stock WEs a lot. In fact, most of my WEs are stock, especially with the bolts and the trigger packs, and that's largely because I can get these parts inexpensively compared to upgrading to steel. Steel is at least triple the amount of money for what I've discovered in my times. And for me, it's much easier to just have a replacement trigger pack, a replacement bolt, and even sometimes a replacement hop-up unit in order to maintain the gun for longevity. And sometimes you don't know what a problem is. You change one part, you change this part, you change that, but oftentimes a new bolt, completely done, and then your problem's fixed. Sometimes I don't know what's wrong with the trigger pack in a WEM4, but if I replace it, it's totally fine.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's nice to have that knowledge of how to replace those things, because if you go to a game like a Milsim West with a gas blowback, you're going to want some of those parts that could end up breaking, because if your gun goes down at Milsim West, you're done for. You're not going back to the parking lot. So having that knowledge is nice. Now, I do kind of want to shift gears for a second. One of the big things of gas blowback rifles is that they're gas. They don't work off of batteries like a standard AEG. And the two most common are green gas and CO2. Some people will convert their CO2 ones to run off of like an HPA system. But really between those two, is there a reason why you should choose one over the other?
So generally CO2, because it's a lower vapor pressure, you can use that in colder weathers or colder climates. When it's at that freezing temperature, CO2 is going to be much more functionable compared to green gas. I personally don't use a GBBR when it's really, really cold outside. About 45, 50 degrees is kind of my limit for a GBBR, and that's just because when you're playing with temperatures like that, you don't know what the pressure curve's going to do. And I would much rather have a nice hot summer day where I'm guaranteed reliability, or at least have a better guarantee of reliability. All of my mags actually are green gas though. And I actually use kind of a mix between green gas and propane.
Yeah, so it's nice that you can also, with having a green gas style magazine, you can try the other things like red gas or any of those, but CO2, you are stuck with just having CO2 in that magazine.
And there's some mags you can convert to use CO2 using some homebrew modifications. I generally don't use those. I just kind of, if I can't use it with green gas or propane, I'll use red gas. Yeah. And if I can't use the red gas or MAP gas, it's very similar, then I just won't use the gun.
Exactly. You got to recognize when the platform isn't going to be the most viable for the event that you're going to. And speaking of bringing these to events, obviously you have less BBs. There's no high caps for these. There's no mid caps. With this GHK, I've got 50 BBs in each one of these, and these weigh way more than AEG magazines. Do you ever feel outgunned?
In some cases, maybe. Other cases, I really don't, because at the same time, you're carrying roughly the same amount of mags. If you normally carry 5 mags for a rifle, with a GBBR, you're probably going to want to be carrying about the same, partly because the weight is much different compared to an AEG mag. But at the same time, I think with the GBBR, it's a different style of play. You're going to want to close in the distance and use kind of the noise of it as kind of an effective deterrent. And especially in CQB or in close quarter type, I don't want to say environments, but those type of facilities or layouts, a GBBR is phenomenal to use, because even though you're going to be reloading more often, I don't find you're outgunned per se, because you have other advantages kind of at the same time. The noise being a huge one.
Yeah, I would say especially LA, like if you go to your local indoor field, you're going to be fine going up against somebody with an AEG or an HPA engine who is maybe 50 feet away. The place that I have noticed that I feel outgunned at times is larger scale events where there's just not a lot of cover in between them. Like for anybody who lives in the Northeast, at EMR Event Park, any games there I've felt outgunned with gas blowbacks.
Yeah.
Just because it's, you can't close the distance. You can't do those things that would give you an advantage there.
Years ago, when you and I went to Fated Giant, I ran a GBBR. I think it was this particular gun converted differently because I have so many parts just laying around. I used a GBBR for that, and there was no cover to be able to close the distance. Once we got inside the facility, it was a little bit different story, but outside there were huge open lanes. You just don't have the volume that an AEG can put out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a GTI for whatever event promoter goes there. So then I guess, with all these things, there's seems like there's a little bit more care. You have to have a little bit more knowledge than an AEG. And it's more expensive at the end of the day because you're paying $60 for magazines. So why choose gas blowback?
For me, it's kind of the manipulation is a lot different compared to an AEG. With an AEG, if you run out, the gun will still fire. These generally stop. You have to, the weight is going to be different. So how it comes out of the pouch feels different. And then the manual of arms to bring the gun back in. And we've seen some AEGs throughout the years have features like that, but with a GBBR, it just feels a lot different. Like a charging handle feels different compared to an AEG. I actually run heavyweight buffers in too, just to have a little bit more recoil impulse, and you're not going to get the same recoil impulse as a real gun, but you can get kind of most of the way there, or at least the halfway tipping point.
Enough that it's cool.
Enough that it is cool. And there's nothing wrong with just having something that's cool.
Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of those AEGs that you mentioned that are trying to replicate the actual process of it, but it never feels the same as doing it on, let alone a real firearm, but compared to a gas blowback, it just never feels the same with those mechanisms. One of the other things that I love is, the loudness of it, because if you bring these to like just your standard open play, you're probably going to scare a kid.
Yes. And you don't have to shoot a lot to do that.
That's my favorite part of like rounding a corner, taking a couple shots, and they just call out and I know I didn't hit them. I'm like, what a great moment in airsoft.
It adds, I love using a GBBR indoors, especially because of how loud it can be. It adds that next level of chaos that if you're not prepared for it or can't manage that, it allows you to have that little bit of an advantage.
Throw a nice amplifier on there as well. And
I don't do that because I try to stick with kind of more typical flash hiders, but just that alone is,
yeah, it is so much fun. So there you have it, everybody. Those are just some of the things that you want to know before you get into the world of gas blowbacks. I think that if you are committed to it, maybe you just want to try something new in airsoft, spice things up. I think this is a great way to do it. There are a ton of options out there, whether you want M4s, whether you want an AK. Submachine guns are especially popular in gas blowbacks.
And they're starting to see a resurgence a little bit.
Exactly. So if you're looking to get into gas blowbacks beyond just the standard pistol that you carry on your hip, I think that it can add a lot to the game of airsoft. But that is going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for joining me, Garrett.
Thank you for having me.
And if you ever want to see him, you can always go to the Gun Gamers channel, which I will have linked down in the description below. But if you want to continue to watch more videos here on YouTube, why don't you click on the video that I have over Garrett's face right now for a video that I'm recommending, or if you want to take YouTube's recommendation, click on the one that's on my face. But my name is Lane, and I will see you all next time.